Story 1. Corfitz-Ulfeldt is not well known outside of Scandinavia, but he is notorious for his actions. In a quick recap, he held a prominent position under the Danish king in the mid-1600s, but was involved in corrupt activities and fled to Sweden, which had been the longtime enemy of Denmark. There, he began working for the Swedish king and not only revealed every Danish secret he knew, but also deliberately did everything possible to incite the Swedes against the Danes, leading to a declaration of war. After a few years, he succeeded. He not only assisted the Swedish troops from the front lines with crucial information about the Danish army and landscape, but also lent the Swedish king large sums of money that he had stolen from the Danish treasury. This money was then used to hire mercenaries for the invasion. The Swedes won, and Ulfeldt regained his own lands and even received a Danish island for his efforts. However, it wasn't long before the Swedish king became annoyed with Ulfeldt, prompting him to flee back to Denmark, where he was arrested. For some inexplicable reason, he was eventually allowed to leave the country under the pretense of needing to visit a spa for his health. Naturally, he did not go to a spa and fled Denmark once again. This time, he sought refuge with various kings in Europe, attempting to involve them in his schemes. He even gave the skull of one of the most significant Danish saints to the French, another item he had stolen. He tried to orchestrate a coup for the Danish throne but was unsuccessful. The Danes never captured him again, but his wife was famously imprisoned in a tower for 22 years, effectively taking her husband's place. Ulfeldt was so despised in Denmark that a statue of shame was erected for him, intended for people to spit on as they walked past. This statue stood in Copenhagen for centuries. Story 2. The Campbells at Glencoe were quite despicable. The Glencoe massacre in 1692 was a brutal episode in Scottish history where government soldiers, many from Clan Campbell, under orders from King William III, killed 38 members of Clan MacDonald of Glencoe. The MacDonalds had delayed swearing allegiance to the king after the Glorious Revolution, and this was used as a pretext for punishment. The most infamous part was that the Campbells had been living as guests among the MacDonalds for nearly 2 weeks, sharing food and shelter, before turning on them in the early morning hours. It wasn't just a massacre. It was a betrayal, seen as a chilling example of state-sanctioned violence and clan politics. The event left a lasting scar and symbolized the deep mistrust between Highland clans and the central government. Story 3. I might be biased, but Pol Pot turned on his own country and caused the slaughter of millions of innocent men, women, and children. It is said he preferred to use hammers on his victims to conserve ammunition. Story 4. Whoever invented the skip ad button but made it appear after you have already watched the full ad. Story 5. Ephialtes of Trachis allegedly showed the Persians the mountain path to defeat the Spartans at Thermopylae. Story 6. Alcibiades was an Athenian general and statesman who was an adversary of Sparta. He betrayed Athens at Messina during the Sicilian campaign and fled to Sparta to escape his political rivals. He persuaded Sparta to send troops to support the Syracusans against Athens. After falling out of favor with the Spartans, he fled to Persia. He then sought to undermine the Peloponnesians, including Sparta and its allies, by advising the Persians on how to weaken them until the time was right to invade. Alcibiades returned to Athens for several years before ultimately facing exile in Persia, where he spent the remainder of his life. Story 7. Vidkun Quisling, Philippe Pétain, Anton Mussert, Léon Degrelle, Ferenc Selassie, Joseph Tissot, Ante Pavelic, and Milan Netic were individuals who collaborated with the Nazis against their own countrymen. Story 8. Kim Philby was a British Secret Intelligence Service agent who became a Soviet spy. Philby was aware of most activities against Eastern European communist countries, including the deployment of agents into various nations that he had already revealed to the Soviets. Hundreds were executed as a result of his actions. Story 9. There are 2 ways to read this question, and I will interpret it in my own way, identifying the worst traitor in terms of actual actions taken. Philippe Pétain. Pétain had it all. He served in World War I and achieved everything one could desire in a military and political career. He was a national hero. His name held great significance, yet he relinquished all of it to lead the French state, known as Vichy France, during the Nazi occupation. One might excuse his actions if he were only trying to protect his people and no one else would step up. Fair enough. However, he did not do that. He actively collaborated with the Nazis, sending French Jews and Jews fleeing Germany to their tragic fates. Pétain is undoubtedly a traitor, and a particularly egregious one, as there was no necessity for his actions. France fell in the 1940s, and he died in 1951. He sacrificed his entire legacy for a drug-dependent leader in Germany and ended up a stain on history, imprisoned because he was too old to be executed. Pétain's motives remain a subject of extensive conjecture. Winston Churchill spoke to Paul Reynaud during the impending fall of France, commenting on Pétain. He had always been a defeatist, even in the last war. Story 10, John Anthony Walker. My dad started in signals intelligence as an airman in 1966, serving in uniform for 21 and a half years, followed by another 14 years as a civilian executive with 2 or 3 government agencies. He was intimately acquainted with the systems Walker betrayed. More importantly, he was officially aware of the extent of that betrayal. It haunted him for the rest of his life. I took care of him in his last months, and he told me the amount of damage Walker caused was almost impossible to comprehend. Story 11. Andrew Jackson's betrayal of the Choctaw and other tribes ultimately resulted in the Trail of Tears. The tribes that allied with him and fought alongside him during the War of 1812. Story 12. Maximilien Robespierre betrayed the National Convention, was a leading figure in the execution of Louis XVI, and was executed for being a traitor. Story 13. Rebecca from my 4th grade class said she was in love with me, but she was just lying because she and her friends thought it would be funny. Tarring and feathering is too good for her and people like her. It took years of therapy before I could accept that someone could care about me, even a little bit. Thank you, everyone, so far. I've never felt so vindicated in my feelings toward Rebecca. I wish I could show this to my 9-year-old self. Story 14. Benedict Arnold betrayed his own people because he felt he wasn't receiving the recognition he deserved, despite already having plenty. When the British learned there was a man on the inside providing them with information, they believed he was a low-ranked soldier. When they discovered it was actually a decorated officer, they were annoyed but maintained composure as they needed Arnold to execute his scheme. It was seen as a massive dishonor that an officer with responsibility over other soldiers would betray his own men. In the end, when he defected to the British, they gave him a lower rank than promised, paid him less than he expected, and many within the British ranks made it clear they did not respect him for his actions. When he eventually died in London, his funeral was conducted without military honors. This was as dismissive as it could get in gentlemanly terms at that time. Story 15. There's Wu Sangue, who opened the Shanghai Pass to the invading army and betrayed his entire country. Is there anyone who comes close to or surpasses him in the magnitude of treachery and betrayal? We're looking for a single person, but close-knit groups of individuals acting entirely as one are also accepted as answers, provided they are not the size of an army. Story 16. Mir Jafar was one of the most influential figures under the reign of Siraj-ud-Dawla, the ruler of Bengal until 1757. The British engaged in significant trade in Bengal, initially peacefully, but as they began amassing armies and influencing the local populace, Siraj-ud-Dawla intervened and took control of British factories. Even though the British recalled their army from across India back to Bengal, they could not have one without support from mainland Britain, which would take months to arrive. When Siraj-ud-Dawla sent his armies for what should have been an easy victory, his general Mir Jafar betrayed him by turning his troops, a substantial portion of the army, against the king's forces. Once Siraj-ud-Dawla was defeated, Mir Jafar ascended to the throne as a puppet Nawab, providing monthly payments to the British. Ironically, the influence he allowed the British to exert also turned against him. As the British increasingly pressured him, he began to disregard his role as a puppet and attempted to resist them. However, he had empowered the British to the point where he could no longer pose a threat, especially with his weakened army. This betrayal enabled the British to secure their first victory in India and ultimately led them to rule Bengal directly. It is entirely possible that this act of betrayal facilitated the British rise to power, resulting in 190 years of exploitation, leaving a wealth that today's elite could only dream of. Story 17. I have scrolled for a long time and am shocked to not have seen any references to Brutus, Cassius, or Decimus. The betrayal and subsequent assassination of Caesar is likely one of the most influential betrayals in history. Story 18. Wang Jingwei collaborated with the Imperial Japanese to form a puppet state during the Second Sino-Japanese War. He can be compared to Philippe Pétain of the East. To a lesser extent, Akechi Mitsuhide could also be considered a traitor. During the Sengoku period, he served under one of the three great daimyos, Oda Nobunaga. He betrayed Nobunaga during the Honnoji incident and laid siege to Honnoji Temple while Nobunaga was on the verge of unifying Japan. Another daimyo, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, would later unify Japan. Story 19. A boy named Tommy reported me in first grade for calling Ms. Radcliffe Ms. Rats jumping off a cliff. It has been over 30 years, and I still remember your betrayal, Tommy. Story 20. Mark Zuckerberg and many other major tech CEOs believe that social media has significantly impacted a generation. Children who experience puberty with Instagram and TikTok may face lasting challenges with attention span and impulse control. Story 21. Thank you to everyone who is providing a bit of context instead of just mentioning a name and leaving. Story 22. Any elected leader who prioritizes lobbying efforts over the well-being of their constituents is failing in their duty. Story 23. I don't care what history books say. The worst traitor is the person who looks you in the eye, laughs at your jokes, encourages you, and then talks negatively the moment you leave the room. I thought we were building trust, not creating a case study in betrayal. At least historical traitors had ambition. You are just messy and bored. Story 24. I am going to answer the question literally. One of the worst traitors in human history was Andronikos Angelos. He was tasked with defending the Byzantine Empire against rebels. Instead, he joined the rebels, hoping to take the throne himself, but he was notoriously incompetent. He lost all the battles he fought. His own men mocked his leadership and many defected. He fled Constantinople in disguise after failing to gather any support for his cause. The emperor eventually had his sons blinded and imprisoned, one of whom later managed to become emperor, Alexios III. Story 25. Simon Fraser, the 11th Lord Lovat, was the leader of one of the most influential noble families in Scotland. After the death of his older brother, he became the next in line to run the clan. He developed an obsession with an underage girl, and when her parents refused to relent, he raped and forcefully married her mother. These women belonged to one of the most powerful families in Scotland, resulting in his exile. His father was then convinced to raise an army with the intent to rebel against the rulers of Scotland. After his father died in exile, Simon became Lord Lovat and led the clan, though he remained in exile. Despite this, he returned to Inverness and caused chaos with an army to reclaim his position as clan leader, which the people eventually accepted. The king pardoned Simon to maintain peace in Scotland while he fought a war elsewhere. For the following years, Simon betrayed many, displaying treachery throughout his life. He completely abandoned his wife without ever divorcing her and remarried twice more as if it were no big deal. Notoriously, for over 20 years, he played both sides in a conflict aimed at usurping the King of Scotland, wishing to replace his family with another previously exiled clan. Ultimately, he became involved in a rebellion attempting to make this happen, but he failed, was captured, found guilty of treason, and became the last person in Britain to be beheaded. Famous for the incident during his execution, an overloaded viewing stand collapsed, killing 9 people, which his family found amusing. This incident is reportedly where the phrase "laugh your head off" originates. Story 26. That depends on the point of view. I would say that all the people who willingly contributed to genocides and mass annihilations are essentially traitors to humanity. Story 27. My former best friend from elementary school not only decided to become a bigger bully to me than anyone else who had bullied me during that time, but he also dated the girl I had a crush on, with what I would later find out was the intention of rubbing their relationship in my face. Story 28. Thomas Midgley Jr., the American who betrayed humanity for the sake of profit, is arguably responsible for more indirect deaths than any other person on Earth. Story 29. Robert E. Lee swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. Instead, he caused the deaths of more Americans than Osama bin Laden. Story 30. Not sure about the worst, but the most well-known traitor in American history would be Benedict Arnold, right? Story 31. Alcibiades was an Athenian general who played a significant role in the Peloponnesian War. He initiated the campaign by arguing for an attack on Sicily. The night before the expedition was set to depart, Alcibiades became intoxicated and committed the desecration of the Herms. This act was seen as a bad omen, leading to a delay in the departure. Displeased with the delay, Alcibiades left with the army anyway. Once the authorities in Athens discovered he was responsible for defacing the statues, he was tried in absentia and exiled. Another general was then sent to Sicily to take over command of the army and to inform Alcibiades of his exile. Feeling frustrated by his exile, Alcibiades defected to Sparta during a battlefield encounter. He assisted the Spartan army in defeating his own forces. Subsequently, he returned to Sparta, where he began an affair with the queen. Once this relationship became known, he fled to Persia. There is more to his story, though I do not recall all the details. I know he aided the Persians against the Greeks for a while before being recalled and reinstated in Athens. However, he once again angered the Athenians, resulting in a second exile, after which he returned to Persia, where he was eventually killed. Story 32. La Malinche is synonymous with traitor in Mexico due to her collaboration with the Spanish during their conquest of the Aztecs. She was a Nahuatl tribeswoman who was given to the Spanish along with other slaves when they defeated a tribe during an expedition into Mexico. She became a key interpreter for the Spanish, as she spoke the Aztec language, and later married Hernán Cortés after the conquest. Story 33. Whoever invented the mobile game advertisement setup, where you watch 15 seconds of it, hit the skip button, wait an additional 5 seconds for the X button, and then click that to be redirected to another App Store page, has created a frustrating experience. Story 34. Marshal Philippe Pétain was a French national hero after he rescued the French army from mutiny and disorder during World War I, only to become a collaborator with the Nazis as the leader of Vichy France during World War II. Story 35. In 1167, the King of Leinster, Dermot MacMurrough, had his title taken away by the High King of Ireland for an unknown reason. To reclaim his land and titles, he invited Henry II, King of England, to come to Ireland and intervene on his behalf. 859 years later, they still have not left. Story 36. The banks, conglomerates, and billionaires are hoarding wealth and resources while watching society crumble around them. Story 37. Andrei Vlasov was a Russian general during World War II who switched sides and fought with the Nazis, helping recruit disillusioned Russians and prisoners of war to his Russian Liberation Army. Story 38. During the French colonization of Algeria, the Harkis not only sold their fellow countrymen to the enemy, but also became involved in the torture and interrogation of liberation fighters. Story 39. Human history is quite complex. Judas Iscariot and Adolf Hitler represent leaders who betrayed their nations and humanity as a whole. Another example is Charles Taylor from Liberia, who also betrayed humanity. May he face justice for his actions. Story 40. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. His actions include influencing the Supreme Court and federal judiciary, facilitating government shutdowns, failing to remove Trump from office, and protecting insurrectionists. McConnell betrayed his oath to defend and uphold the Constitution. The consequences include the current constitutional crisis, a trade war, the loss of U.S. dollar dominance, and stagflation. His betrayal may enable Trump to initiate a real conflict with China, leaving us to fight alone with no allies. The most alarming consequence of McConnell's betrayal is its impact on the climate. The absence of leadership in this regard could cause significant damage to future generations. McConnell's betrayal may be the critical factor leading to humanity's extinction. Story 41. According to the Bible, Cain betrayed and murdered his brother, making him the first traitor in history. Story 42. The guy who told me up high, down low, too slow. That sensation of my hand missing his was excruciating. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.